Tonight at 10, the Chancellor sets out plans to help hard-pressed families facing some of the worst economic headwinds in decades. Delivering his spring statement, he warned we should all be prepared for the economy to worsen, but he told the Commons new tax cuts would ease the burden for millions.
A tax plan that cuts taxes on working families by over £330, cuts taxes on fuel by 5 pence a litre, cuts taxes on business, and yes, for the first time in a long time, cuts income tax.
Inflation is at its highest level for 30 years and rising. Energy prices at record highs. People are worried sick.
There is a bleak prediction and a tough backdrop. The Chancellor can make his promises, but our living standards are set to fall.
So, what difference will the Chancellor's spring statement make to struggling families? We'll look at the numbers. Also tonight. Schools out for Afghan girls, heartache as the Taliban fails to resume secondary education. In Ukraine, the city of Mariupol devastated by Russian shelling. We'll talk to one of the survivors of the siege.
I'm Madeleine Albright.
And America's first woman Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, has died. She was 84.
Coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, Arsenal's women start their bid to reach the Champions League semi-finals against Wolfsburg.
Good evening. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has set out his plans to address the cost of living crisis, predicted to be the worst in decades. He told MPs that fuel duty would be cut by 5p per litre through to March next year, though national insurance payments are set to rise from April the 6th. He said the threshold at which people will have to pay any contribution will be raised by £3,000 from July. That means you'll need to earn at least £12,570 a year before paying any income tax or national insurance. And Mr Sunak said he intends to cut the basic rate of income tax, the first reduction in 16 years, from 20% to 19% by the end of the current Parliament in 2024. But the Chancellor also gave some eye-watering figures on inflation, or the rate at which prices go up. Today, it hit 6.2% in the 12 months to February, with the Chancellor saying that's likely to reach an average 7.4% for this year. And he talked about the UK's growth forecast, which has been revised down to 3.8%, for which he blamed the conflict in Ukraine. Overall, he conceded that everyone should be prepared for the economy and public finances to worsen, potentially significantly. And this was backed up by the Office for Budget Responsibility, which provides independent economic forecasts to the government. The OBR says household disposable incomes are set for their biggest drop since records began. Well, our first report tonight is from our political editor, Laura Koonsberg.
Peering ahead, there is threat all around. Rising prices and falling standards of living that could push some families to the edge.
Is there more pain to come, Chancellor?
Rishi Sunak is the man who has to manage the economy through to the other side.
Are you doing enough to help working people, Chancellor?
Yet can every step be certain when our world is anything but?
I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak.
In the next half hour, he had the power to change what's in the country's pockets.
The invasion of Ukraine presents a risk to our recovery, as it does to countries around the world. The war's most significant impact domestically is on the cost of living. People should know that we will stand by them as we have throughout the last 2 years.
Standing by is not the same as supporting everyone's income, and help for drivers was first.
I want to help people now. Today, I can announce, for only the second time in 20 years, fuel duty will be cut. Yeah. Not by 1, not even by 2, but by 5 pence per litre.
With the cost of fuel for your tank and heating your home spiralling, VAT will disappear on ways of making your home energy efficient, and there's an extra £500 million for those who struggle most to pay the bills. Yet these weren't drastic moves. The Chancellor holding back because
we should be prepared for the economy and public finances to worsen potentially significantly.
interest on debt will tip £80 billion, more than the government spends day to day on schools, courts, prisons and borders put together. Yet although money's tight, Rishi Sunak vowed to undo some tax rises he's already put in place.
From this July, people will be able to earn £12,570 a year without paying a single penny of income tax or national insurance.
And then to more cheers on his own side, he promised a penny off income tax. But not now, in time for the next election, still 2 years away.
Before the end of this Parliament, in 2024, for the first time in 16 years, the basic rate of income tax will be cut from 20 to 19 pence in the pound. My tax plan delivers the biggest net cut to personal taxes in over a quarter of a century, and I commend it to this House.
But there's the world in there, excitement among Conservatives about hypothetical tax cuts. And the world out here, the economy promising only weak sunshine. Families and firms are already struggling to make ends meet.
Shadow, Chancellor of the Exchequer. Leads all leads.
For Labour, the ups and downs of tax vows miss the point.
Today was the day that the Chancellor could have put a windfall tax on oil and gas producers to provide real help to families. But he didn't. Today was the day the Chancellor could have set out a proper plan to support businesses and create good jobs.
Exactly.
But he didn't. Today was the day that he could have properly scrapped his national insurance hike. He didn't. People are worried sick. For all his words, it is clear that the Chancellor does not understand the scale of the challenge. He talks about providing security for working families, but his choices are making the cost of living crisis worse, not better.
The opposition parties accusing ministers of turning their backs.
The Chancellor has not done nearly enough today to help with the cost of living crisis. People who are receiving their energy bills through their doors just now, there is really nothing additional for them today other than the Heat Now, Pay Later loan that the Chancellor already announced.
Whilst there are some measures that are to be welcomed, on the whole as a package we're very concerned that it won't actually address the scale of the crisis, and many households across Wales and particularly in rural areas will still find it a big struggle to pay some of those bills.
There is a climate-shaped hole at the heart of this statement. You know, the Chancellor didn't even mention the word climate once, and that is all the more unforgivable given that the solution to the climate crisis and indeed the cost of living crisis is the same. What we need to see is a mass home insulation programme.
His focus for now, though, is at the pump and the promise and reality of some tax cuts.
Perfect. How are you doing? Good. Yeah.
For Rishi Sunak, for the government,
How are you?
the taxpayer cannot and should not pick up everyone's tab. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, despite the Chancellor's concessions on tax, the Office for Budget Responsibility says overall taxes will hit their highest level since the late 1940s in coming years. Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
Even before today's actual tax and spending decisions, the fate of the economy and of the finances of millions of households was revealed by rises in prices for fuels, food and electricity, pushing inflation to a new 30-year high. The grim news from the government's economic forecaster that this will be with us for some months yet. Since the 1990s, inflation has generally stayed below 4%, but hit 6.2% in today's figures. In their last forecast, the OBR recognised energy prices would push inflation up this year. Now the OBR says it will rise even higher for longer to just under 9%, the highest level since the 1980s.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine happened halfway through our forecasts, but we did take energy prices a week after the invasion happened, and roughly speaking, energy prices have returned to those levels in the last few weeks. That does have a big impact on inflation. It's pushed it up to 8.7%, its highest level in over 40 years, and had a knock-on effect on growth. It's brought it down from 6% in our previous forecast to 3.8% in this forecast.
The Chancellor's big announcement was to lower 2 taxes. But since the start of this Parliament, the government has announced tax rises worth nearly 4% of the size of the economy for income tax, national insurance and corporations. Even with today's moves to lower tax, the government is pushing up the overall tax burden in the economy to its highest levels since the 1940s. This is all about scale, the half reversal of a national insurance rise that is yet to hit, alongside the down payment on an income tax cut that will come in a couple of years, will be material, worth hundreds of pounds for tens of millions of households eventually. But they're dwarfed by the existing tax rises already in train across the economy and the incredible hit to living standards from rising prices, in particular energy. Put all of that together, and even despite the government support, millions of households this year will see real post-tax incomes fall by 2%, the biggest amount in 66 years that these statistics have existed. But some will be hit harder.
If you're not an income taxpayer, if you're not in work and not paying national insurance, there was literally nothing in there for you. Now, benefits, universal credit means excessive benefits, state pension, going up by just 3.1%. Next month, inflation over the year is expected to average something like 7%. That's going to be a big cut in the living standards of those on the very lowest incomes.
And there are some very big questions not yet fully answered, arising from inflation staying so high for so long. Public sector workers, alongside pensioners and recipients of tax credits, are likely to push hard for more public spending to ease their squeeze. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Well, what's been the public reaction to the Chancellor's attempts to try to ease the cost of living crisis? Our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth, has been gauging the mood in Tamworth, in Staffordshire.
Hello, all right? You had a good day? Yeah, it was all right. Good, good.
The Fords are a busy family.
Kids, coming out!
And for them, like many, it is the day-to-day routines that are becoming costly. After school, there's football and dancing, family dinner.
You take the car.
And with fuel, food and energy bills all climbing, they're having to think about what they spend in a whole new way.
Thinking of our food bills each week, it's definitely increased, probably at least £20 to £30 if you think in the last 12 months. And I am conscious, actually, we turn lights off, shut doors.
Fuel prices mean driving to after-school activities is more expensive, so Susie shares lifts with other families, making today's cut in fuel duty welcome. But at daughter Lottie's dance club, few are jumping for joy at the prospect of prices rising further. Parents watching children dancing or playing cricket say things are already a stretch.
It's the electric bills and the gas bills. And
I'm very conscious of not having the heating on at home.
Well, our wages don't go up at the same rate, so it's all coming out of our pocket.
I think the government really need to step up and start doing something about this now, because it's not on.
Giving over 30 million workers a tax cut worth over...
Back at the Fords, Susie watched to see if the Chancellor would bring much relief, and for her the changes to national insurance will help.
Working part-time, that is beneficial for myself. So yes, it's a better outcome than we could have anticipated.
And the income tax cut due in 2 years?
I suppose it's a case of sit and wait.
For many here, it's a case of waiting to see if it makes a difference. The market town of Tamworth is in the West Midlands, which already has some of the most deprived areas in England. The measures announced by the Chancellor today are meant to mitigate the financial pressure so many households are facing. But with prices set to rise further, there are plenty here still worried about what's to come. The cost of living could well be a defining challenge for this government. For Martin, it's already a struggle. He set up a courier company during COVID, and rocketing fuel prices have been crippling.
We're paying an extra £20 to £40 a day per van. So if we operate 7 days a week, that's up to £600 a week.
So will today's announcements help?
I think it's embarrassing that that's the best the British government can do. I mean, next week the fuel pumps will probably go up by 5p, so that's swallowed up straight away.
That's the risk, as well as the impact on families and firms. If costs keep climbing, there could be a political price to pay too. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Tamworth.
Let's talk to Laura Koonsberg, who's at Westminster tonight. Laura, how well do you think did the Chancellor walk that tightrope of trying to be positive and give things away, while at the same time inflation and growth are heading in the wrong directions?
Well, Clive, it's a very, very difficult balancing act at a time like this, and on a day like this too, a huge amount of information, and it will take some time to dot all the I's and cross all the T's and work out exactly what the sum of the parts that Rishi Sunak put forward. But several things are clear tonight. Clear, absolutely, that Rishi Sunak wants to be seen as a tax cutter. He tickled the tummies of his own party tonight by promising tax cuts before the next election. It was clear also that right now the Treasury is not in the mood to promise significant and drastic, huge amounts of extra cash to help people who are already feeling the pinch. Yes, of course, there's the promise of cuts of fuel duty. Yes, of course, there's the tinkering with the thresholds of national insurance. Yes, there was some money for people who are really feeling the worst of some of the increases in energy bills, but no significant, huge action. No action, for example, for people on benefits. And above all else, what's absolutely clear tonight, looking at the forecasts that were published, is that there are very, very significant pressures coming down the line for everyone, for firms, for families, for the government itself. Those suggestions of where inflation might land, and for quite a long time, are the kinds of things that for any government are a very, very difficult thing to manage. And I think, Clive, that for all that the Chancellor made promises about his own hopes for times ahead, that means that he's going to be managing a very, very tricky backdrop, and he leaves himself open to the charge that the opposition is already making tonight, that the government has not yet understood the scale of the challenge that people are already facing, just how tough things may be for household budgets in the months ahead.
OK, Laura, thank you for that. Laura Koonsberg there, live at Westminster. And there's more information on the spring statement and what it could mean for you on the BBC website. Just go to bbc.co.uk/news. On to other news, and the Taliban has abruptly ordered girls' secondary schools in Afghanistan to remain closed on the day they were due to reopen. Many had been shut since last August when the Taliban retook control of the country. A spokesman says more time's needed to decide what uniforms female students should wear. Our correspondent Sekunda Kamani has more from Kabul.
Dusting the desks, the morning began full of smiles and hope. For these students in the west of Kabul, returning to school felt particularly poignant. Last year, more than 90 were killed here in an attack by the local branch of the Islamic State group. We want to be successful so we can fulfill the dreams of our martyred classmates, says Sakina. That will be our revenge on those who were responsible. Not long after they've arrived, there's unexpected bad news.
The girls had literally just sat down at their desks and the head teacher got a WhatsApp message from the local Taliban in charge saying that actually teenage girls can't come back to class just yet. And the girls are just devastated.
We just want to learn and to serve our country, says Fatima. What is our sin, she asks the Taliban. You're always talking about Islam. Does Islam say to harm women like this? It doesn't. I want to address the girls of Afghanistan. Please don't give up fighting for your rights. The Taliban's Ministry of Education pressed ahead with a ceremony marking the start of the new academic year, but seemed at a loss to explain what had gone wrong. The central leadership has said until a plan is developed on the basis of Sharia and Afghan culture, girls' secondary schools will remain closed, the spokesman told us.
We were at a school in the west of Kabul today. There were teenage girls in tears because they've been told that they have to go home again. Who should they blame for this?
I work for the Ministry of Education, he says. We had made our preparations. You need to ask someone representing the leadership. The students filed home just an hour or so after having arrived. In private, Taliban members admit hardline elements within the group still find the idea of female education controversial, even though schools are already segregated. That leaves these young women deeply worried for the future. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
Let's get the very latest now on the situation in Ukraine and cross to my colleague Ben Brown, who's in the western city of Lviv. Ben.
Yeah, good evening, Clive. Well, for the very first time, there are signs that Ukrainian forces are going on the offensive. The Ukrainian government says its troops have retaken the town of Makariv. That's to the west of the capital, Kyiv. Local authorities there are saying Ukrainian flags are now flying in the town once again. And volunteers and troops in the southern town of Voznesensk have destroyed a Russian armoured convoy and pushed back Russian forces. And in Kherson, the first city to fall, Ukrainian forces are now trying to recapture lost territory. But the port city of Mariupol is still under intense Russian bombardment. Well, President Zelensky says around 100,000 civilians are still trapped there without food, water or power. And our correspondent Wira Davis has been talking to a survivor of the Russian attack on the city's theatre, where hundreds of civilians, including children, had been taking shelter.
Maria walked for 4 days to escape Mariupol. Without money, a car or family, she has nothing. She's the first known survivor of the Mariupol theatre attack to speak about what happened.
The theatre was completely packed with people. There was no space to lie down. People were just sitting. It was clear that this was a shelter. People knew this. Also, those massive signs saying children that were made on both sides of the theatre.
Where were you at the exact time of the attack?
We were getting our breakfast. By breakfast, I mean we were getting some boiled water. Someone brought me some pieces of fish, I think, to feed the dogs. When they finished eating, I went outside to that water tank to get a bowl of water for them. This is when the shell landed. I saw that it landed just where I'd been sitting. I was outside and survived only because there was some man nearby. He heard the shell falling, grabbed me by the collar, pinned me between the ground and the wall and covered me with his body. We were sprayed with broken glass and concrete. I was stunned, probably even concussed, because I fell unconscious several times since. When the dust settled a bit, I cleared my eyes. I saw injured people around. I tried to make my way inside. The dogs were the family for me. They were everything I had left. I could not find a way to get inside, to at least find out whether they're alive or dead. I sincerely hope they died instantly.
Maria says there were at least 1,000 people inside the theatre, while Russia denies targeting civilians and says it wasn't responsible. What Maria saw suggests otherwise.
I don't know how many people died, sorry. There were some rooms in there. Those were allocated for families with children. That part of the theatre is completely gone.
Partially deafened by the blast, her back in pain, Maria now relies on the kindness of friends. She worries for her grandmother in Mariupol and mourns her dead pets. At just 27, it's difficult to stay strong. Wira Davis, BBC News, Zaporizhia.
Well, in a moment, we'll be speaking to our Europe editor, Katia Adler, who's in the Polish capital, Warsaw. First, though, let's speak to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, who's in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Lise, the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has recorded a new message tonight to mark 1 month since the Russian invasion of his country. What's he been saying?
Yes, well, let me just first remind viewers the speech that he recorded in the early hours of February 24th, which was just hours before Russia invaded Ukraine. He was sitting in his office in his suit, and he said he had tried to contact President Putin, but he only got silence. And he appealed in Russian to the people of Russia to stop the invasion, which, of course, was also met with silence. A month on, in the early hours of what is March 24th, here in Kiev, he's recorded another address in his olive green fatigues, or brown fatigues tonight, outside the presidential buildings. And he has appealed in English to people around the world, saying this is not just a fight against Ukraine, this is a fight for freedom, the freedom of the world. And he has called on people around the world to leave their offices, their schools, their homes, to take Ukrainian symbols, to go into streets and squares and basically show that they will fight this war, because he said, only the world can defeat this war. It's a big gamble to see. We already have seen a response in many countries around the world. And now he has again upped the stakes to say, if it really matters to you, show it. He's a man who was a former entertainer. He understands that in a war, there's the narrative about the war and the war unfolding on the ground. And tonight he's shown that he understands that more than most.
All right, Lise, thank you. And Katja Adler in Warsaw. President Joe Biden is heading to Poland on Friday. Tomorrow he's with NATO leaders in Brussels. What is he hoping to achieve, do you think?
Well, first of all, Ben, this is a very big moment because President Biden comes to Europe when security here is more under threat than it has been in decades, when nuclear war is a possibility thanks to Vladimir Putin's threat. So Joe Biden tomorrow has 3 major meetings with the G7, with NATO and with EU leaders. At all of these, he'll be looking at how to stop the bloodshed in Ukraine, how to support the country in the meantime, and how to keep imposing sanctions on Russia until it agrees to a realistic ceasefire. After that, he does head here to Poland. That's a show of solidarity with Eastern European countries that feel most exposed towards Russia. But, Ben, you know, the more brutal Russian attacks become in Ukraine, the harder the decisions for Western leaders as to just how much they intervene, and the more difficult it becomes for Joe Biden to maintain that unity he's come here to Europe to emphasize.
OK, Katja, thank you very much indeed. Katja Adler there for us in Warsaw, and also Lise Doucette in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. That is it from me and the team here in Ukraine. Back now to you, Clive, in the studio in London.
Ben, many thanks for that. Ben Brown there in western Ukraine. Now, Jamaica's Prime Minister has told the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge that his country is moving on and intends to become an independent nation. Andrew Holness has been meeting Prince William and Kate on their visit to the Caribbean, marking the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Our royal correspondent, Johnny Diamond, has sent us this report from the Jamaican capital, Kingston.
Today looked like business as usual. The Duke and Duchess at a teacher training college, pursuing Kate's passion for early years learning. But first, from the Jamaican Prime Minister, a public reminder that he wants an end to the British monarch's role as head of state.
But Jamaica is, as you would see, a country that is very proud of our history, very proud of what we have achieved, and we're moving on. And we intend to attain in short order our development goals and fulfill our true ambitions. Independent, developed, prosperous country.
This won't have been what the Duke and Duchess were expecting. The Prime Minister did campaign on a pledge to make Jamaica a republic. But to speak to the couple like this, in front of the cameras, is pretty strong stuff. If offence was taken, they certainly weren't showing it. But the Prime Minister's words are a reminder that the ties between Britain and the far-flung realms depend on present-day politics as much as the long links of history. Johnny Diamond, BBC News, Kingston, Jamaica.
The former US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, has died at the age of 84. She'd been living with cancer. A child refugee from Czechoslovakia, she rose to become America's top diplomat, the first woman Secretary of State in US history. Our Washington correspondent Nomia Iqbal looks back at her life, a warning her report contains some flash photography.
Madeleine Albright was a trailblazer.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Madam Secretary.
In 1997, she became America's top diplomat, the first female to do so. But her story began outside of America. The daughter of a Czech diplomat, her family fled Prague from the Nazis when she was a year old. A decade later, her family was granted political asylum in the US. Her childhood would go on to shape her views and her policies. On the political stage, Madeleine Albright was the face of US foreign policy during the President Clinton years. She pursued what she called aggressive multilateralism, pushing for intervention in the wars that tore apart Yugoslavia. She was a major influence on US policy in the Middle East, clashing with Saddam Hussein over sanctions on Iraq. He called her a serpent. And so began her use of jewellery to make a diplomatic point, starting with a snake. Russia's President Putin once said he knew what the mood of a meeting would be by looking at her left shoulder. The 84-year-old supported getting other women in higher positions. She backed Hillary Clinton in 2016 with a comment that some considered controversial. She later apologised for it.
Just remember, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other.
Arriving in Europe tonight, President Biden said in a statement that Madeleine Albright was a force and hers were the hands that turned the tide of history. There was also a tribute in the UN from those who have followed in her footsteps.
She left an indelible mark on the world and on the United Nations. Our country and our United Nations are stronger for her service.
Only last month, she warned that if President Putin invaded Ukraine, it would be a historic error. Madeleine Albright was raised in a time when Eastern Europe was in crisis, to only see that crisis return during her final days.
Madam Secretary Madeleine Albright, who's died at the age of 84. That's it. Now on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Have a very good night.